For any of us who garden, we watch the weather. We generally watch for the temperature and the chance of rain and all those sorts of things. Well, here we are in early October, and the last few days it was calling for a low of 31, just below freezing. And it's an opportunity to really look closely in the landscape. That first frost towards the end of the season can give you so much information about where it's extra cold, where there's warmer microclimates and the like. I'd like to take a look in the garden and look around the property and see what sort of information we can get from it, so stick around. I wish I could be in two places at once. I know from a bunch of years of experience here that our site, where Sasha and I live, our half acre, we're on a north slope, 1,200 foot elevation. When there's a remote threat of frost in the area, we can absolutely expect frost where we live. The main 6-acre site north of Trumansburg, it's very close to Cayuga Lake, which is a huge thermal mass. I'm pretty confident it didn't frost at all there last night. We'll have to take a look when we get out there later on. Our garden in the back here, I can see that the frost definitely went all the way through most leaves. So this is a killing frost. A lot of our annuals are going to be done for. Once the sun comes out a little later, that freezing through the cells will have erased the life force from the squashes, any tomatoes, basils, those sorts of crops. And our hardy perennials, they certainly won't have taken a hit from 31 or even 30 degrees. But it's definitely a switch in the growing season over to transitioning towards fall. We had to get all of our potted plants and lemon verbenas and those in last night. And our backyard garden here, which by most accounts is the sunniest, most open place for us to grow things, actually got the most frost on our property. If I look further upslope into our neighbor's large mowed lawn, their entire grass there is completely crusty. The woods, they look a little bit less frozen. I suspect there's more latent heat that is stored under those trees that can radiate out at night and keep the frost off a little bit. Really interesting observation we get to see here. We applied very, very deep mulch of hay about 2 weeks ago over some of these beds to reclaim them, to keep them from being weedy. And I can see pockets all through here where it's crusted with hay that's frozen, and then it's completely thawed in between. The mulch of the hay preserved enough warmth in the soil below that warmth could radiate up. It could be a little bit about the composting process, but more likely than not, it's the insulative effect of the hay allowing the warmth of the still warm from the summer soil radiating up through there. Good reminder that deep mulches help conserve warmth in the soil. Very, very clear picture of that. Thawed out, frozen. Where the mulch is extra deep, it's thawed out. And in fact, here's a hay bale with no ice on it whatsoever. And that may very well be because it's actively decomposing just a little bit. Pushed it a few more degrees up. So that deep mulch, that gentle composting process, the deep deposition of organic matter, certainly adds some warmth to the areas around it. Pretty interesting image there. Crusty, icy grass on the neighbor's property. Underneath the protective shade, so to speak, thermal shade or shadow of these shrub layers, the ice did not form underneath there. It's almost like a little dry spot, so to speak. So it's warmer underneath those shrubs because they're holding on to the warmth of yesterday. They're protecting from the cold, which settles down and slides. So more shrubs, more trees confers more warmth and protection to the areas around them. Taking that concept a step further and scaling it up, here's the huge ornamental apple just to the south of our home. Very large canopy to shelter and buffer from variations of weather that are happening. Underneath this apple and closer to our home, squash leaves, which if they were out in the garden would absolutely be crusted through and frozen, they didn't get any frost at all. So here we're seeing a microclimate that by being associated to the south of our home enjoying the protection from the winds, enjoying some of the latent heat from that greenhouse, but more than anything, having the protection of a canopy above helped keep this little pocket from freezing last night. I'm not saying by any stretch that it means it'll keep it from freezing all winter, that'd be crazy, but talk about a little mini microclimate. It generally means getting underneath the trees and the shrubs, perhaps to the south of them. This whole area, which is more or less under the canopy of the apple and just slightly to the south, tiny bit of frost, but nothing like the areas that are out and exposed in the main garden. And here we're right up against the house with real protection from the winds and cold. The poke root, which is incredibly sensitive to frost, no frost whatsoever. So anytime you can associate your tender plants up against thermally massive objects like houses or brick walls and the like, it really does seem to make a difference. And it's days like this where we're just on the edge, slightly frosted, that you can get real information. As I would expect, objects that are more exposed, so in this case the car with very thin glass and metal, cold can penetrate that very quickly. And so this actually has a nice crust of ice on the glass. So thin exposed objects up and off the ground that are conductive, they suck up cold very, very quickly. It's a reminder to me that there's some inherent fragility in committing trees to grow in these boxes that are up off the ground. I'm not worried about these air prune beds because these are all very hardy trees. I have no concern that one night down in the low 30s, upper 20s means that the roots have frozen and that they've been really hurt. But if we had a cold snap, a low of 22 overnight, or 2 or 3 days that out of nowhere freezing came in really hard and fast, these are exposed bits. They've got some thermal mass, some inertia, and I know that this soil didn't crust or freeze at all last night. It's a good reminder, if you do a lot of things in containers, you're asking for the benefit of extra warmth in the summer, but more fragility as you get to the swing season in the fall, especially in colder places. In our front yard closer to the road, we certainly get frost just like in the back, but not as intense generally. It's kind of interesting to see here in this raspberry patch with the shelter of the raspberries, some seedling pawpaws down lower in got no frost. Again, that same idea of having canopy helps protect from that cold descending air settling down. And likewise, the raspberries, they've got a little bit of frost, but not that much, in part because there's a woodshed here, and that's got its own buffering effect, blocking wind, and also the canopy of the apple conferred some protection there. And in general, I think this area in the front, because there's so much more vertical complexity, there's an overstory to the west, these tall elders, the big sunchokes, all of that creates some protection for the lower plants. There's little persimmon seedlings that have almost no ice crust on them down in there. And I think that has a lot to do with this undulating overstory that's helping to protect. Our chickens didn't frost, so that's good. You're thawed out, right? They don't like those jokes. Back in here with our crazy chicken composting system, there's a lot of heat being generated, and so most of this whole little sphere is completely protected from frost for a little while. Even this big elder got just about no frost on it. I think that's up here, a little high up, it got a little frost there. A little frozen drop. I've gone on and on long enough about all this. More than anything, what I'm hoping this video conveys is some interest in folks that haven't done this yet. I bet a lot of you, this is old news. You've gone out and looked after the first frost to see what's happening. But if you haven't yet, do yourself the favor, when you get that first frost, go outside, see what the landscape can teach you. When you get that first really deep freeze, maybe down in the 20s or so, where does the water crust? Where does ice form the first? Where does it take the longest to thaw out? It gives you a lot of subtle, nuanced information about the warm and cool spots in your property and about some really interesting design directions you can take things. Let us know. Did it freeze by you? Hope your gardens are growing well and they're going to bed in graceful ways. Thanks for watching.